"We need to make a child," the Apache woman said, and the cowboy went completely still. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the dusty hills, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple. On the outskirts of a small frontier town, Ethan, a rugged cowboy with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands, rode back toward the ranch he had called home for the past few years. The wind whispered through the tall grasses, carrying with it the scent of dry earth and distant pine. Ethan's horse, a sturdy chestnut named Bramble, moved steadily, knowing the way home better than any map. Ethan had been on the ranch since he was a boy, learning to work with the land and animals, always keeping to himself, preferring the company of horses over people. That evening, as Ethan approached the ranch, he noticed an unusual sight. A small group of people was gathered near the edge of the creek that ran beside the property. They were unlike any travelers he had seen before, dressed in traditional clothing, their movements careful and deliberate, their faces carrying a quiet intensity. Ethan slowed Bramble to a walk, squinting against the setting sun. Among them was a young woman whose calm presence seemed to radiate strength. Her dark hair framed a face that was both strong and gentle, and her eyes, deep and thoughtful, seemed to take in everything without judgment. Ethan felt a strange mixture of curiosity and caution. He had grown up hearing stories about tension between settlers and native tribes, about misunderstandings that often led to conflict. But there was no hostility in these people, only a quiet determination that made him pause. He guided Bramble closer, keeping his distance but letting the horse's steady steps announce his approach. One of the men looked up, nodded politely, and returned to tending a small fire. The young woman, Ahioka, did not look away. Her gaze met his, steady and unflinching. Ethan dismounted slowly, dust rising around his boots. "Evening," he said, his voice low, careful. "You folks need help." Ahioka nodded slightly. "We are travelers," she said, her voice soft but clear. "We seek shelter for the night and water for our horses. We have traveled far." Ethan noticed the weariness in their bodies, the dirt under their fingernails, the tired slump of their shoulders, the way their horses' coats were dull from long days on the trail. He felt a pang of empathy, remembering nights when he had arrived at a friend's ranch exhausted, with only the stars to guide him. "You can stay near the creek," he said after a moment. "It's safe and there's fresh water. I'll bring some food." Gratitude passed over Ahioka's face, subtle but genuine. "Thank you," she replied. There was no hint of fear or mistrust, only a quiet relief. Ethan nodded and walked back toward the ranch house, gathering what provisions he could spare. As he carried a basket of bread, dried meat, and fresh water, he kept glancing at Ahioka and her people. They worked together with quiet efficiency, pitching a small, makeshift shelter, tending the fire, brushing down their animals. Ethan had always admired people who understood the importance of working together, and something about this group stirred a curiosity he could not ignore. When he returned with the food, Ahioka stepped forward to help, her hands moving gracefully as she accepted the basket. "You have been kind," she said simply. "Many would have turned us away." Ethan shrugged, feeling slightly awkward under her gaze. "It's just the right thing to do," he muttered. "A night's shelter won't hurt anyone." Ahioka smiled faintly, a small movement that carried warmth. "Kindness is rare," she said, "even in lands filled with strangers." That night, as the campfire crackled and the stars sparkled above the plains, Ethan sat at the edge of the small clearing, watching Ahioka's people settle in. He noticed the quiet way the young woman moved, how she tended to the children who had traveled with the group, how she adjusted the blankets for the elderly, how she spoke softly to the animals, calming them with gentle words. There was a rhythm to her actions, a grace that seemed natural, not learned. Ethan found himself drawn to it, feeling a pull he could not quite name. The others in her group spoke little, but Ethan caught fragments of conversation, plans for their journey, worries about the coming winter, hopes that they could find safety and stability. Despite their hardships, there was dignity in the way they carried themselves, a pride that had not been broken by the difficulties of life on the frontier. Ethan thought about his own life, the days spent tending the ranch, the quiet loneliness he often felt despite being surrounded by people. There was something grounding about Ahioka's presence, something that made the world feel less harsh, at least for a moment. Finally, the fire burned low and the group settled down for the night. Ethan stood and approached Ahioka. "I can show you to the barn," he said. "It's safer for the horses, especially tonight." Ahioka nodded, her dark eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "Thank you," she said again. There was no hesitation, no need for elaborate thanks, just honesty, simple and sincere. Ethan led the way, guiding the horses to the barn where they could rest without worry. He watched Ahioka as she helped her people, realizing that her strength was quiet but unshakable. When he finally returned to the clearing, he found himself lingering. The fire had almost died out, leaving only embers glowing softly in the darkness. Ahioka was sitting cross-legged, her gaze fixed on the stars. Ethan hesitated, then took a seat a short distance away. They sat in silence for a long moment, the kind of silence that is full of meaning, where words are not necessary to communicate understanding. "You've traveled far," Ethan said finally, breaking the quiet. "How do you manage it all? The journey, the people, the animals?" Ahioka's eyes met his. "We do what must be done," she replied simply. "Each step matters and each choice carries responsibility. To survive, one must carry both courage and care. Without one, the other cannot exist." Ethan nodded slowly, thinking about the truth in her words. He had always relied on courage, riding hard, working the land, facing danger, but he had sometimes forgotten care. Care for others, for life beyond himself, for the world he lived in. There was a quiet wisdom in Ahioka, a way of seeing life that made him feel both humble and curious. As the night deepened, Ethan realized he was watching more than just a campfire. He was watching a way of life, a dedication to family, community, and survival that he had never truly understood. The young Apache woman had arrived in his life unexpectedly, bringing with her a perspective that challenged him, unsettled him, and yet felt strangely right. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while, he felt that life held something beyond routine and solitude. When he finally stood to leave, Ahioka looked up at him and nodded slightly. "Rest well," she said. "Tomorrow will be another day, and every day carries new challenges." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I'll see you in the morning," he replied, and he walked back to his cabin, the sounds of the night, crickets, the soft rustle of wind, the distant call of a coyote, filling the space between them. He knew, even then, that this meeting was the beginning of something significant, though he could not yet name it. Outside, the stars continued their silent journey across the sky. Inside, Ethan sat by the hearth, thinking about the people he had just met, and most of all about Ahioka. Her presence lingered in his mind like the last warmth of the fire, a quiet, enduring light that promised change, challenge, and connection. And for the first time in many years, Ethan felt that the world might hold more than the life he had always known. The next morning, the sun rose slowly, casting a warm golden light over the dusty plains. Ethan stepped outside, stretching his stiff muscles from a night of uneasy sleep. Even though he had rested, his mind had not, wandering repeatedly to the camp by the creek. The image of Ahioka sitting by the fire, her dark eyes reflecting the stars, lingered in his thoughts. He shook his head, trying to clear the feeling, but the sense of something unusual about her presence remained. When he arrived at the clearing, the Apache group was already up. Children laughed quietly, playing near the water, while the adults prepared a simple breakfast. Ahioka moved among them with calm efficiency, offering a hand where it was needed and speaking softly, guiding without commanding. Ethan watched from a short distance, admiring the quiet strength she carried. It was not the kind of strength that shouted for attention, but the kind that filled a space with respect without demanding it. "Morning," he said as he approached. Ahioka looked up and smiled faintly. "Good morning," she replied. There was a rhythm to her voice, steady and measured, like a song that had been learned from the earth itself. "You slept well?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "Better than I expected," Ethan said, glancing at the small fire where the others were cooking. "It's a calm place here, peaceful, I mean." Ahioka nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Peace is something we all seek," she said. "Even when the world is loud and full of danger, peace can be found if we know where to look." Ethan felt a strange stirring of respect for her. There was wisdom in her words, simple but deep. He had spent years surviving the harsh life of a cowboy, relying on instinct and toughness, but here was someone whose survival depended on patience, understanding, and connection. He found himself watching her more closely, noticing the way she encouraged the children to share the few toys they had, how she made sure the horses were fed, and how her presence calmed even the elders who were clearly tired from travel. By mid-morning, Ethan had offered to help with chores, fixing a broken fence, carrying water, and tending the horses. The Apache people accepted his help without hesitation, and he felt a sense of belonging he had rarely known. Ahioka stayed near him for much of the work, occasionally offering instructions or guiding him on how best to handle the animals. She did not hover, did not correct him harshly, but she had a way of teaching without seeming to teach. Ethan noticed small details, the way she adjusted the rope on a horse's harness, the gentle tone of her voice when speaking to a frightened colt, the careful attention she gave to balance strength with care. When the chores were done, the group settled beneath a large oak tree to rest in the heat of the afternoon. Ethan took a seat on a nearby log, watching Ahioka as she spoke quietly with a young girl, helping her braid her hair. The sunlight caught strands of dark hair, and for a moment Ethan forgot everything but the rhythm of her movements. Then, without warning, Ahioka walked over to him and stood silently, her eyes meeting his. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice steady. "There is something I must ask of you." He frowned slightly, uncertain. "What is it?" he asked cautiously. He had learned to expect the unexpected when dealing with people from different walks of life, and there was something in her tone that suggested this request would be far from ordinary. Ahioka took a deep breath and spoke clearly, without hesitation. "We need to make a child." Ethan froze completely. The words hung in the air, weighty and shocking. He blinked, unsure whether he had heard correctly. His mind raced. Questions of morality, responsibility, and the enormity of her request flooded him at once. He had never imagined himself in such a situation. His heart pounded, and he felt as if the earth itself had paused for a moment. Ahioka continued, her gaze unwavering. "This is not a demand born of desire alone," she said. "It is a matter of survival. Our people are few, and our future depends on the children we bring into this world. I ask because I trust you, and because I believe you have the strength and heart to understand what this means." Ethan struggled to find words. Part of him wanted to speak without thinking, to reject the idea outright. Another part felt the pull of responsibility, the silent acknowledgement of a duty he had never expected to encounter. He knew the historical weight of what she was asking. Her request was tied to the preservation of a culture, the continuation of a community. It was not just about them. It was about generations to come. I don't know what to say," he finally managed, his voice rough from disbelief and emotion. This isn't something I can decide lightly." Ahioka nodded, her expression patient but firm. "I understand," she said. "This is not a decision to be made in haste. I only ask that you think deeply about it and consider what is best, not just for yourself, but for what comes after us." The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze for Ethan. He watched Ahioka from across the camp, noticing how naturally she interacted with the group, how her presence brought calm, how her laughter, though rare, was bright and infectious. She was neither demanding nor pleading. She simply presented the truth of her situation and allowed him to confront his own conscience. Ethan walked to the edge of the creek alone, dipping his hands into the cool water and letting it flow over his skin. He thought about his own life, years spent riding alone, tending the ranch, surviving one challenge after another. He had never faced a question like this, one that demanded both courage and heart in equal measure. The weight of responsibility pressed on him, heavy and unfamiliar, and yet there was something compelling in Ahioka's trust. As the sun began to lower again, casting long shadows across the plains, Ethan returned to the camp. Ahioka was sitting beneath the oak tree, watching the children play. She looked up as he approached, her eyes calm and steady, offering no judgment, only understanding. "I've thought about what you said," Ethan said quietly, unsure of how to begin. I need time to understand everything. It's a lot, and I need to be sure I can do what is right, not just for me, but for everything you're talking about." Ahioka smiled faintly, a warmth that eased some of his tension. "Time is something we all need," she said. "The choice must come from the heart. It must be made freely without fear or pressure. I will wait." Over the next days, Ethan and Ahioka spent more time together, working side by side, sharing stories of their lives, their struggles, and their hopes. She told him about her childhood, growing up learning the ways of her people, about the importance of community, of family, of tradition. He shared stories of life on the ranch, of the harsh winters, the long rides, the loneliness that had been his constant companion. Through these conversations, Ethan began to see Ahioka not just as a young woman asking something extraordinary, but as a person of courage, wisdom, and compassion. He understood that her request was not a whim, it was an act of faith, an invitation to participate in something far greater than himself. One evening, as the campfire burned low, Ethan found himself sitting next to her. The sky was dark, the stars bright, and the quiet of the plains surrounded them. He realized that he was no longer thinking of her request with fear alone, but with respect and consideration. He saw the strength of her heart, the depth of her thought, and the way she had quietly changed the rhythm of his own life. "I think I understand now," he said softly. "I understand why it matters and why it's not easy." Ahioka turned to him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Understanding is the first step," she said. "The rest comes from choice and from the willingness to act when the heart is ready." For the first time, Ethan felt a sense of clarity. He did not yet have all the answers and the future remained uncertain, but he knew that this moment, this conversation, this trust, was the beginning of something profound. It was a turning point, not just for him and Ahioka, but for the possibilities that lay ahead. And as the night deepened, with the sounds of the plains surrounding them, Ethan realized that life had presented him with a challenge unlike any he had faced before. One that required courage, understanding, and a willingness to step into the unknown. One that could change everything. He did not speak again that night, but he did not need to. The silence between them was full of meaning, full of the weight of decisions yet to be made. And in that quiet, Ethan understood that his life, and perhaps the life of another, would never be the same. The next morning, Ethan woke before the sun had fully risen, the cool air of the plains brushing against his face. Sleep had come fitfully the night before, and he felt the weight of Ahioka's words pressing on his mind. "We need to make a child." Those words repeated in his thoughts, echoing louder with every passing hour. He sat quietly in his cabin, listening to the faint sounds of the ranch waking up, the low whinny of a horse, the soft rustling of wind through the tall grasses, the distant crow of a rooster. Each sound reminded him of the life he had always known, a life of work, solitude, and routine. Yet now, everything seemed different. Ethan stepped outside and walked toward the creek where Ahioka and her people had made camp. The morning sun cast golden light across the water, making it sparkle like a scattering of diamonds. Ahioka was already there, tending to her group. She moved with quiet confidence, gathering water and arranging supplies for the day. Children played nearby, their laughter soft and bright, echoing across the open plains. Ethan watched for a moment, taking in the rhythm of their morning. He felt conflicted. Part of him admired Ahioka's strength, the way she cared for her people without complaint. But another part of him felt unsure, hesitant. He had spent his life relying on courage and independence, yet now he faced a decision that required more than bravery. It demanded understanding, patience, and a deep sense of responsibility. He had never imagined such a challenge would come his way. Ethan approached Ahioka slowly. "Morning," he said, his voice uncertain. She looked up, smiled faintly, and nodded. There was no judgment in her eyes, only a quiet understanding that seemed to see straight into him. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, "about what you asked me yesterday." He hesitated, unsure how to continue. "It's a lot to take in." Ahioka nodded, sitting on a nearby rock. "It is," she said gently. "I understand it is not a small thing to ask of someone. It is not a choice made lightly, and I do not expect an answer immediately." Ethan sank onto a log, running a hand through his hair. "I've never faced anything like this before," he admitted. "I've lived by myself, worked hard, survived, but it's different. It's not just about me or even about the two of us. I can feel that it's bigger than that." "Yes," Ahioka said softly, "it is bigger. It carries the hopes of my people, the continuity of our ways, but it also carries the responsibility of care, respect, and love. It is a test, not of courage alone, but of the heart." Ethan looked down at his hands, calloused and rough from years of work, and wondered if they were capable of such care. He thought of the children he had seen with Ahioka, the laughter and light in their eyes, and the way she guided them with patience. He realized that what she was asking required trust, not only in her but in himself. Over the next several days, Ethan continued his work on the ranch, but his mind remained divided. Every task he completed, every horse he tended, every fence he mended, he did with a sense of reflection. He would often pause, imagining the future, imagining the responsibility of raising a child, imagining the blending of his life with Ahioka's world. He spoke occasionally with the older ranch hand, a man named Samuel, whose wisdom had guided Ethan through many difficult moments before. "Samuel," Ethan said one afternoon as they fixed a section of fence together, "I've been asked something. Something I never thought I'd have to consider, and I don't know if I can." Samuel looked up, his weathered face thoughtful. "You've always been brave, Ethan," he said. "But bravery isn't always about facing danger. Sometimes it's about facing yourself. About making the right choice even when it scares you. Listen to your heart. It will guide you." Ethan nodded, but the words offered only partial comfort. That night he returned to the camp by the creek. The fire was low, casting flickering shadows across the ground. Ahioka sat quietly, watching the children settle for sleep. Ethan approached, unsure of what to say or how to begin. "I've been thinking about your request," he said carefully. "I can't pretend it's easy for me to understand fully. It's overwhelming." Ahioka turned to him, her expression calm and unhurried. "It should be overwhelming," she said. "It is a responsibility that cannot be taken lightly. That is why I asked you to think, to consider, to feel your heart. Only when you are ready can a choice be made with clarity." Ethan took a deep breath, the cool night air filling his lungs. He thought about her people, about the children, about the life that had seemed so distant from his own. He realized that this challenge was not just about a single decision. It was about understanding, about empathy, about stepping beyond his comfort and facing the unknown. Over the next week, Ethan spent more time with Ahioka, learning the ways of her people. He watched her teach the children, guide the elders, and care for the animals. He saw her strength, but also her gentleness, her patience, and her ability to make everyone around her feel valued. He began to understand that what she asked was not a test of fear or desire, but a test of trust. One afternoon, while helping to mend a broken wagon wheel, Ethan spoke quietly to Ahioka. "I think I'm beginning to understand," he said. "It's not just about what we do, it's about the life we can give, the trust we can share, the responsibility we carry. I've never thought about life this way before." Ahioka smiled faintly. "Understanding is the first step," she said. "But understanding must be followed by action. The heart must choose, and the choice must be made freely. No one can make it for you." Ethan spent the night thinking again, staring up at the stars that stretched endlessly across the plains. He thought about the paths his life had taken, the solitude he had always known, and the unexpected presence of Ahioka. He realized that he was not just considering a choice about the future, but about who he was and who he wanted to become. In the days that followed, the bond between Ethan and Ahioka grew stronger, not through words alone, but through shared experiences. They worked together in silence, understanding the language of gestures, glances, and shared labor. Ethan began to see life through her eyes, a life that balanced courage with care, independence with community, and strength with compassion. He also began to see himself differently. He realized that fear and hesitation were natural, but they could not hold him back from doing what was right. He understood that the decision ahead would not be easy, but it could also be the most meaningful choice of his life. One evening, after the children had gone to sleep and the fire burned low, Ethan and Ahioka sat side by side, watching the stars reflected in the quiet water of the creek. Ethan felt a sense of peace he had never known, even as the weight of responsibility pressed upon him. "I don't have all the answers yet," he admitted softly. "I don't know exactly what the future holds, but I feel something. A sense that this is right, that it matters, and that I have to face it. Not just for me, but for you and for them." Ahioka turned to him, her eyes reflecting both the firelight and the stars above. "The heart knows many things before the mind understands them," she said gently. "You feel it because it is true. Courage is not the absence of fear, Ethan, but the willingness to act in spite of it." Ethan nodded, feeling a warmth that was both comforting and terrifying. He realized that the journey ahead would be full of challenges, questions, and responsibilities. But he also understood that this was a chance to grow, to connect, and to be part of something far greater than himself. And as they sat together, side by side, Ethan felt a quiet determination forming within him. He did not yet have all the answers, but he knew that he was ready to face the choice ahead. He knew that whatever decision he made, it would shape not only his life, but the life of another, and perhaps even the future of a people who trusted him to understand what mattered most. For the first time, Ethan understood that true courage was not about fighting alone or surviving hardship. It was about understanding, empathy, and the willingness to step into the unknown. And in that understanding, he felt a connection to Ahioka, to her people, and to a future that was uncertain yet full of hope. The days grew warmer as spring began to touch the plains, bringing life back to the grasses and trees. Ethan woke early, as he had for many mornings, but today there was a difference in his steps. He felt the weight of decision pressing on him, and he knew he could no longer delay the moment of clarity he had been seeking. The words Ahioka had spoken weeks ago, "We need to make a child," had settled deep in his mind. He realized that this was more than a choice. It was a turning point. Ethan walked slowly toward the creek where Ahioka and her people were beginning their day. He noticed the quiet rhythm of the camp, children stretching and yawning, elders moving carefully, and Ahioka already tending the small fire. She looked up as he approached, her dark eyes calm, as if she knew something important had shifted in him. "Ethan," she said softly, "you have been thinking, I can see it in your eyes." He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Yes, I've been thinking and I've realized I cannot ignore this. Not anymore. I've spent days wrestling with fear, with doubt, with what this might mean for me, and yet I feel that I understand now. I understand the responsibility. I understand what you are asking and why it matters. Ahioka's expression did not change dramatically, but there was a quiet relief in her posture, a subtle easing of tension. That is all I have ever asked, she said. Understanding is the first step. The next is choice, and the choice must come from the heart. Ethan drew a deep breath and looked around at the camp. He saw the children laughing as they chased each other through the grass, saw the elders smiling softly at the morning sun, and noticed the way Ahioka guided everyone with quiet patience and care. He understood then that her request was not merely about the future of her people, but also about the life she had nurtured around her, the care she gave, and the trust she placed in him. I want to do this, he said finally, his voice steady, though his heart raced. I want to make this choice with full understanding of what it means. I want to step into this responsibility, not out of obligation, but because it feels right. Because it matters, not just for me, but for you and your people. Ahioka looked at him for a long moment, her eyes soft but intense. Then you understand, she said simply. This is not about impulse, nor about desire alone. It is about commitment, respect, and care. You have chosen to act not in fear, but with a heart that knows what is right. Ethan felt a mix of relief and awe. He had spent so long relying on his instincts, his courage, and his solitude, that the idea of committing to something so profound felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Yet the fear was no longer paralyzing. Instead, it was tempered by clarity, purpose, and trust. He looked at Ahioka and realized that this decision connected them in a way that went beyond words. It was a bond of understanding and mutual responsibility. Over the next few days, Ethan and Ahioka began to work more closely together, preparing for the journey that lay ahead. They discussed the practicalities of life, the care required for a child, and the ways they could blend their worlds to create a life filled with safety, love, and respect. Every conversation deepened their bond and strengthened their trust. Ethan learned more about Ahioka's culture, her values, and the importance of community, while she observed his strength, reliability, and willingness to grow. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, they worked side by side in the fields, repairing fences and tending to the horses. Ethan looked at Ahioka, noticing how naturally she guided the younger members of her group, how she balanced patience with firmness, and how her presence seemed to bring calm to everyone around her. He realized that the decision he had made was not just about bringing a child into the world. It was about committing to a life that required constant care, understanding, and attention. I've never met anyone like you, Ethan said quietly as they paused to rest, wiping sweat from his forehead. Not someone so strong, yet so gentle. Not someone so wise, yet so patient. I see now why your people trust you the way they do. Ahioka smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Strength comes in many forms, she said, and patience is learned through necessity, but it is courage that carries both strength and patience forward. You have found your courage, Ethan. That is why you are ready. The evening came quickly, bringing a soft chill that made the fire in the camp all the more welcome. Ethan sat near the flames, watching Ahioka as she spoke with the elders. He realized that he no longer felt the fear that had once gripped him. Instead, he felt a sense of purpose and clarity. He understood that life would not be easy, that challenges would come, but he also knew that the path he had chosen was meaningful and necessary. Later, when the children had gone to sleep and the camp quieted, Ethan approached Ahioka. The night was calm, the stars reflecting in the water of the creek, and the soft chirping of crickets filled the air. He felt the weight of the moment, knowing that their next steps would change their lives forever. I am ready, he said softly. I want to do this, Ahioka. I want to accept the responsibility, not just because you asked, but because I believe in what this means. Not just for a child, but for the life we can build together, for the future we can shape. Ahioka looked at him, her expression calm, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. Then you have made the choice of the heart, she said. A choice not made lightly but with understanding. You have accepted responsibility, and that is the first step of many. Together, we will walk this path with care, respect, and courage. Ethan felt a sense of peace he had never known. He realized that this decision was more than a personal choice. It was a commitment to life, to community, and to the future. The fear that had once threatened to paralyze him was replaced by determination, clarity, and a quiet excitement for what lay ahead. Over the next days, Ethan and Ahioka continued to prepare for the next stage of their journey. They organized the camp, shared stories with the children, and taught each other the ways of their respective worlds. Ethan learned to understand not just the practical aspects of care, but the emotional, spiritual, and cultural significance of their decision. He saw the future in a new light, realizing that it was built not only on strength, but also on patience, empathy, and connection. One afternoon, as they sat together watching the sun dip below the horizon, Ethan felt the full weight of his choice. He understood that their journey would be filled with challenges, but he also saw the promise in the life ahead. He looked at Ahioka, the calm determination in her eyes, and felt a deep sense of trust and partnership. "I know the road ahead will not be easy," he said softly, "but I am ready. I will do my part, and I will be present in every way for what is to come." Ahioka nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "That is all I could hope for," she said. "Together we will face the unknown. Together we will create life, nurture it, and guide it with care. Courage is not the absence of fear, Ethan, but the willingness to act despite it. You have found your courage." That night, as the stars shone above the quiet plains and the camp settled into sleep, Ethan felt a sense of connection he had never known. He understood that the choice he had made was not a simple one, but it was meaningful. It was a choice born of trust, understanding, and commitment. He realized that life was about more than survival. It was about connection, care, and the courage to embrace responsibility, even when it was daunting. And as he watched the fire burn low, Ethan knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he was ready. He had chosen not out of fear, but from the heart, and in that choice he found strength, clarity, and hope for the life that lay ahead with Ahioka. The months passed slowly, filled with work, preparation, and quiet anticipation. Spring had given way to early summer, and the plains were alive with color. The tall grasses swaying in the warm wind, wildflowers dotting the landscape, and the sky stretching endlessly, painted in bright blue. Ethan had grown used to rising early, tending the horses, fixing fences, and helping Ahioka care for her people. But now, his routine carried a new weight, a sense of purpose that he had never known before. Each day, he thought of the future they were building together, a future that would soon include a child, a living promise of hope and continuity. Ethan and Ahioka worked together seamlessly, their bond strengthened by shared responsibilities and understanding. He had learned to notice the small details that mattered, the way Ahioka's hand rested gently on a horse's neck, the careful way she spoke to the children, the soft encouragement she gave to the elders as they moved about camp. He had learned to listen, to wait, to act with both strength and patience. Through it all, he realized that this journey was not about heroism or grand gestures, but about everyday acts of care, attention, and love. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, painting everything in warm gold, Ethan sat with Ahioka by the creek. The children had gone to bed, and the camp was quiet except for the gentle sounds of water flowing over stones and the occasional chirping of birds returning to their nests. Ethan looked at Ahioka, her face calm, serene, and full of quiet strength. He felt a wave of gratitude and awe. "You've taught me more than I could have imagined," he said softly. "Not just about your people or your culture, but about life itself, about what it means to care, to be responsible, to act with the heart. I feel different. Stronger but also more aware, more alive." Ahioka turned to him, a faint smile brushing her lips. "Life teaches us in many ways," she said. "Some lessons are gentle, some are difficult, but the heart always knows the truth, even when the mind hesitates. You have learned well, Ethan, and now our next step approaches." The following weeks were filled with preparation. Ethan and Ahioka ensured the camp was organized, the animals cared for, and supplies ready. They spoke often of the child that was soon to be born, not in words of fear or doubt, but in words of hope, planning, and intention. Every discussion was a reminder of the responsibility they shared and the life that would be entrusted to them. Finally, the day arrived. Ethan had been awake before dawn, helping with the preparations, ensuring that everything was ready. Ahioka had grown stronger and more patient in the months that had passed, and Ethan felt a deep admiration for her endurance and grace. When the moment came, they were both calm, holding on to the trust and understanding they had built. As the hours passed, Ethan stayed by her side, offering encouragement, adjusting blankets, fetching water, and supporting her through each contraction. The children and elders waited nearby, giving them privacy while maintaining a sense of care and community. The sun rose and fell, casting warm and soft light over the plains as the labor continued steadily. Finally, as the evening approached, a cry rang out across the small camp. Ethan felt a rush of emotion, relief, joy, all at once. Ahioka held a tiny, wriggling infant in her arms, wrapped carefully in a soft blanket. The child's eyes opened briefly, reflecting the fading sunlight, and Ethan felt a sense of wonder he had never known. "She's beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She's perfect." Ahioka smiled, exhaustion and happiness mingling in her expression. "She is," she agreed softly, "and she carries both our worlds with her. She is a bridge between the past and the future, between what has been and what is yet to come." Ethan knelt beside her, placing a hand gently on the tiny shoulder of the child. A sense of awe and responsibility washed over him. He realized that this moment was the culmination of everything: the trust, the courage, the love, and the choices that had led them here. The child was not just a symbol of hope for Ahioka's people, but also a reflection of the connection he had forged, the understanding he had gained, and the life he was committed to nurturing. Over the next days, the camp adapted to the presence of the new life. The children gathered around, curious and gentle, while the elders offered guidance and blessings. Ethan learned quickly, with Ahioka's patient guidance, how to care for the infant, feeding, comforting, and soothing her when she cried. He discovered that strength was not enough. Tenderness, attention, and empathy were equally essential, and with every passing moment, he felt a deeper connection not only to Ahioka, but to the life they were building together. Evenings became times of reflection. Ethan and Ahioka would sit together by the fire, the child sleeping peacefully between them, and speak quietly of the future. They spoke of hope, of dreams, and of the responsibilities they now shared. Ethan felt a sense of fulfillment unlike anything he had experienced before, a combination of pride, awe, and profound love. One night, as the stars shimmered above the quiet plains, Ethan held the child in his arms while Ahioka watched. "I never imagined life could feel like this," he said softly. "I thought I understood courage, I thought I understood responsibility, but this is something else entirely. It's hope, it's love, it's everything I never knew I could feel." Ahioka reached out and placed a hand gently on his arm. "This is the gift of life," she said, "and you have accepted it with courage and heart. You have grown in ways that only responsibility can teach. Together, we will guide her, protect her, and help her grow. She is the future, but she is also a reflection of our choices, our trust, and our care." Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The child grew stronger, laughing, learning to crawl, and exploring the small world around her. Ethan and Ahioka worked together tirelessly, teaching her the ways of both their worlds, the respect for the land, the importance of community, and the lessons of courage and care. The child became a living testament to their trust, love, and understanding, a bridge between worlds and a promise of hope. Ethan often paused during these days to reflect. He thought about the fear and hesitation that had once held him back, the doubts and questions that had plagued him when Ahioka first made her request. And he realized that without facing those fears, without stepping beyond the comfort of his solitude, he would never have discovered this joy, this connection, or this sense of purpose. He had learned that life's greatest challenges often lead to its most profound rewards. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting warm light over the plains, Ethan and Ahioka sat together, the child sleeping peacefully between them. Ethan reached out and took Ahioka's hand, feeling the quiet strength and wisdom in her grasp. "I understand now," he said softly. "I understand what matters, what it means to care, and what it means to trust, and I am grateful to you, to her, and to life itself." Ahioka smiled, a gentle warmth in her eyes. "Life teaches us in ways we cannot always see," she said. "But when we face it with courage, understanding, and heart, we find joy beyond what we imagined. You have done well, Ethan. Together, we will continue to guide her, and together, we will honor the trust that has brought us here." Ethan looked at the child once more, a symbol of hope, love, and continuity. He realized that the journey they had taken, through hesitation, struggle, understanding, and commitment, had not only shaped the life of the child but had transformed his own life as well. He felt a deep connection to Ahioka, to her people, and to the future that lay ahead. And as the stars sparkled above the quiet plains, Ethan knew that the choice he had made, the courage he had found, and the trust he had honored had created something extraordinary. Life was no longer just survival. It was connection, love, and the promise of a future filled with hope. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt truly complete. He had stepped into responsibility with courage, embraced love with heart, and discovered the profound joy of nurturing life. And in the quiet, with the fire burning low and the plains stretching endlessly around them, he understood that their journey, though challenging, had created something far greater than either of them could have imagined. The child slept soundly, a living bridge between worlds, carrying with her the hope, strength, and trust of those who had brought her into being. And Ethan, once a solitary cowboy, now felt the deep satisfaction of purpose fulfilled, of love shared, and of a life forever changed.